systems and restricted movement in ways that seemed excessive for a routine shutdown. I met Oleg at a truck stop outside Kyiv, a grey place that smelled of diesel fuel and old coffee. He was hesitant to talk, kept looking over his shoulder even though the Soviet Union had been gone for years. Some fears don't fade with political systems. It felt like something was being protected, Oleg said, his voice low. Or hidden. I couldn't tell which, but I've made deliveries to military facilities. I know what that kind of security looks like, and in the 3 days before the explosion, Chernobyl had that same feeling. Like the plant wasn't just a power station anymore, like it had become something else. He described checkpoints that hadn't existed the previous week, credentials being verified against lists that guards carried in sealed envelopes, entire sections of the facility blocked off with new barriers and warning signs. On April 24th, I delivered equipment to the main administrative building. While I was waiting for signatures, I saw officers going in and out of a conference room, high-ranking, the kind who don't normally show up for turbine tests, and they looked worried. Not the kind of worried you get before a routine procedure, the kind of worried you get when something's already gone wrong and you're trying to figure out how to fix it. Oleg pulled out a delivery manifest from 1986, faded and creased from years of being carried in his wallet. He kept it all this time, he said, because it was the only proof he had that he'd been there. The manifest showed deliveries on April 23rd, 24th and 25th, standard industrial equipment for the first 2 days. But the April 25th delivery was marked differently. Special handling, military receiving, a notation in the corner that read K-Program Materials. I asked what K-Program meant, Oleg said. The receiving officer told me to forget I'd seen it, not in a threatening way, in a tired way, like he was exhausted from carrying secrets. The pieces suggested a disturbing possibility. If military units were on site before the explosion, they either knew something catastrophic was about to happen, or they were there as part of whatever Program K actually involved. Either way, the official narrative of a sudden, unexpected accident didn't match the reality, and the presence of military personnel days before the disaster suggested planning, preparation, the kind of infrastructure you build around an experiment, not an accident. Chapter 4. The reactor did not explode once. The official story describes a single catastrophic event. At 1:23 and 40 seconds on the morning of April 26th, a massive power surge caused Reactor 4's core to rupture. The explosion destroyed the reactor building, ejected radioactive material into the atmosphere, and started fires that burned for days. One explosion, one moment of failure. But seismic data tells a different story. I obtained access to seismographic records from monitoring stations in Ukraine and Belarus. These stations continuously recorded ground vibrations, used primarily for detecting earthquakes, but sensitive enough to pick up large industrial events. The data showed 2 distinct energy releases that morning. The first occurred around midnight. It registered as a moderate disturbance, consistent with an internal structural failure. Not large enough to destroy a building, but significant enough to indicate something had gone seriously wrong inside the reactor. The second occurred at 1:23, exactly when the official timeline placed the explosion. This was the massive event that everyone knew about, the one that destroyed the building and scattered radioactive debris across the surrounding area. But if there were 2 events, what happened during the hours between them? I found a former plant security officer named Leonid, who'd been on duty that night. He'd been stationed at the perimeter, far enough from Reactor 4 to survive, but close enough to see what happened. There was a sound around midnight, he remembered, deep, like something heavy breaking inside a building. And then there was confusion, people running, radio chatter, but no alarm, no evacuation order, just chaos that was being contained. What do you think happened? Leonid shook his head. I think something failed inside the reactor, something that exposed the core. And I think they spent the next hour trying to figure out what to do about it before everything went completely to hell. The implication was staggering. If the reactor core had been compromised hours before the main explosion, then dozens of workers had been exposed to lethal radiation levels while trying to manage a situation that was already beyond saving. And if that was true, then the official timeline wasn't just incomplete. It was a deliberate reconstruction designed to hide what actually happened. Chapter 5. The men sent in first. In the official narrative, the first responders were firefighters and emergency crews who arrived after the explosion. Brave men who fought the fires and contained the immediate crisis, many of whom died from acute radiation syndrome in the days and weeks that followed. But there were others, men who were sent into high radiation zones before the main explosion, men whose names don't appear in the official lists of first responders. I learned about them from a nurse named Irina, who'd worked at the medical facility in Pripyat. In the hours and days after the disaster, she treated hundreds of people for radiation exposure. She kept notes, unofficial records of who came through and what their symptoms were. There were workers who came in before the firefighters, she told me, maintenance staff, technicians. Their exposure levels were enormous, far higher than what they should have been if they'd only been exposed after the main explosion. How is that possible? It's not, Irina said flatly, unless they were already inside contaminated areas before the explosion happened. She showed me her notes, faded and water-stained but still legible. Names, times, symptoms, estimated exposure levels. Several workers had been brought in around 2 a.m, just after the main explosion, but their radiation doses suggested they'd been exposed for hours. One entry stood out. Pyotr Markov, instrumentation technician, brought in at 0 to 15 hours, exposure estimated at 600 Röntgen minimum, complained of nausea, confusion, severe headache, kept saying we were just supposed to observe. 600 Röntgen was a lethal dose, and Pyotr's symptoms suggested he'd been exposed long before 2 a.m. We were just supposed to observe. What had he been sent to observe? I tried to find Pyotr Markov, but he died 3 days after the explosion. Acute radiation syndrome. His death was recorded, but his work assignments that night were not. Irina had more to tell me, though. After our first meeting, she called me back 3 days later. She'd been thinking about Pyotr, she said, remembering more details. He wasn't alone when they brought him in, she told me. There were 4 others, all instrumentation technicians, all with exposure levels that didn't match the timeline, and they all kept asking the same questions. Where's the containment team? Why didn't the alarms work earlier? How long had the core been exposed? She paused, her voice shaking slightly. One of them, I can't remember his name, he grabbed my arm while I was trying to get an IV started. He was already delirious, his skin was red and blistering, but he looked at me and said, "They sent us down at midnight. We measured the radiation levels, we reported them, and they sent us back down anyway." "Did you report this?" Irina laughed bitterly. "To who? The same people who'd sent them down there in the first place? The same officials who were already constructing the narrative about operator error? I was a nurse. I treated patients. I documented what I saw, but I knew better than to ask questions that no one wanted answered." The pattern repeated. Multiple workers with exposure levels that didn't match the official timeline. Multiple workers who'd apparently been in high radiation areas before they should have been. But what haunted me most was what Irina said next. They knew they were dying. All of them. You could see it in their eyes. And what made it worse was that they knew they'd been sent in there deliberately. They'd been ordered to witness something, to gather data about something, and it had killed them. And they understood, even in their delirium, that no one would ever acknowledge what they'd been sent to do. They'd been sent into the reactor building for a reason, not to fix anything, to witness something, and whatever they saw killed them. Chapter 6. The blue light was not normal. In the testimonies from survivors, the detail appears repeatedly. A strange blue-white light that workers described seeing near the reactor core in the hours before and after the explosion. Officially, this is explained as Cherenkov radiation. When charged particles move through a medium faster than light travels in that medium, they emit a characteristic blue glow. It's a well-understood phenomenon, common in nuclear reactors. But the descriptions from Chernobyl didn't quite match typical Cherenkov radiation. Workers described the light as pulsing, intensifying and fading in waves. Some reported feeling electromagnetic interference, watches stopping, radio equipment malfunctioning. One worker, a crane operator named Dimitri, described seeing the light through a window in the reactor hall moments before the main explosion. I found Dimitri living in a small apartment in Belarus, still on medical monitoring decades after the disaster. His hands shook constantly. Neurological damage, the medical report said, though whether from radiation or trauma was impossible to determine. It wasn't steady, he told me, his voice still haunted decades later. It was like something breathing, getting brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again. And there was a sound, high-pitched, made your teeth hurt. He got up